A man vanished from a locked room. No door opened. No window. No sound. But he took his pen with him.
Elias Vane crossed the threshold, his coat collar turned up. A window stood open, inviting a draft that smelled of damp earth and vine. The room was frozen chaos. Elias knelt by the rug, observing the ink. It felt too centered, too deliberate. The Rolex and wallet sat like bait. Thieves take gold. Ghosts take nothing. What does that make you, Lorenzo? He combed the desk. The files were undisturbed, but a specific indent in the velvet-lined drawer caught his eye, an absence where a heavy object had recently sat. The Montegrappa's resting place. The ink was on the desk, but the vessel was gone. A man being dragged to his death doesn't pause to pocket his pen. He examined the window frame. Outside, the soil was pristine. No boot prints, no scuff marks. Elias checked the locks, biometric bolts, all engaged from the inside. The red LEDs glared back like accusing eyes. The digital log showed no tampering. The door had only been opened by Lorenzo's code at 1:50 a.m. After that, the room became a vault. Amidst the spilled ink, Elias fished out a scrap of paper. It was a fragment of a blueprint showing a sub-level layout that didn't match the villa's public plans. He checked the ceiling sensors. They were green, humming, yet they had reported zero movement during the abduction. Behind a 17th century painting, Elias's fingers traced a faint line in the dust. The wall hadn't moved, but the air behind it felt hollow. Under the lip of the desk, he found a micro-transmitter. Lorenzo wasn't just living here, he was being monitored. Elias messaged Director Miller. The scene is theater. The motive is still backstage, proceeding with the players. He stepped into the corridor, where the three survivors waited like vultures.
Marco Rossi stepped forward, his face a mask of grief. "My brother was a fighter," he barked, though his hands betrayed a rhythmic tremor. Elias saw a fresh bruise on Marco's wrist, the mark of a desperate grip. Marco saw the look and pulled his sleeve down. "A man in Lorenzo's position collects enemies," Elias noted. Isabella, the stepmother, cut in. "Sometimes the seller is inside the house, detective." She lit a cigarette. She revealed that Lorenzo was hours away from stripping Marco of his inheritance, an act that would have left the playboy a beggar. "You wanted him gone," Marco hissed, "to keep the estate before he sold the vineyards." Pietro Moretti, the partner, stood in the shadows. He was sweating despite the breeze. "How was the firm, Pietro?" Elias asked. Pietro stammered about stability, his pupils blown wide. As Pietro reached for a handkerchief, a micro SD card slipped from his pocket, clattering onto the marble. Pietro scrambled, but Elias was faster. The label, Private Audit, Confidential. The partner was stealing files while the seat was still warm. Marco unleashed a fresh accusation. He'd seen Isabella outside Lorenzo's door at 2 a.m., whispering into a burner phone. Isabella didn't blink. "I was speaking to my lawyer. In this house, silence is a luxury." Elias weighed them. Marco had the debt. Isabella had the ambition. Pietro had the secrets. All three were drowning. Sophia, the housekeeper, pulled Elias aside. She whispered that Lorenzo hadn't slept in a week. He'd been talking to the walls. "He was cornered," she said. "A man like that, he'd rather burn the forest than let the hunters catch him." Elias looked at the corridor carpet. He noticed faint parallel indentations leading into the study. Something heavy had been dragged inside shortly before the disappearance. Why bring something into a crime scene? It defied the logic of a kidnapping. A search of Marco's room revealed gambling markers, 10 million euros in debt to the Milanese syndicate. The investigation was a hall of mirrors, every suspect reflecting a different version of greed.
In the gardens, Elias found Antonio, the groundkeeper, scrubbing a shed. "See anything last night?" Elias asked. Antonio admitted seeing a black sedan creeping through the vineyard at 2:15 a.m. "The lights were off. It moved like a shark," Antonio whispered. "An electric car. Isabella's Tesla was plugged into the villa's port, its hood still warm. Antonio claimed there were 2 figures in the car, but the tent was too dark for faces." Elias walked the vineyard path. The soil held tire tracks that ended abruptly near a drainage culvert. The tread pattern was identical to the ones on Marco's sports car. The clues were deliberately conflicting. Elias paused. Why would a kidnapper leave a witness unless the groundkeeper was part of the script? Inside the shed, Elias noticed a missing coil of nylon rope and industrial silver tape. "Only the family has the key," Antonio confirmed. The insider theory was now a certainty, but who was the lead? He looked up to see Isabella watching him from the balcony, a statue of serene indifference. Sophia intercepted him again. She mentioned a loud thump from the study around 2:10 a.m. "And the screams?" Elias asked. Sophia shook her head. "Just the sound of the wind." The lack of resistance was the loudest clue in the room. Elias began to suspect this wasn't a kidnapping, it was an evacuation.
By dusk, the forensics team delivered a bombshell. A ransom note had surfaced on the villa's server. 5 million euros, no police, or we send him back in pieces. "Trace it," Elias commanded. The technician pointed to the screen. Internal IP. It came from Isabella Rossi's laptop at 2:15 a.m. Marco exploded. "I knew it. The bitch sold him out." A search of Isabella's device found a hidden folder with the ransom draft and Lorenzo's offshore codes. Isabella stood surrounded by officers, looking at the laptop as if it were a strange insect. "Your handiwork?" Elias asked. Isabella looked him in the eye. "If I were going to kill him, I wouldn't leave the weapon on my nightstand." Pietro chimed in, confirming Isabella's debts. The evidence was overwhelming. Elias looked at the timestamps, 2:15 a.m., the exact moment the car was in the vineyard. It was the perfect narrative. Isabella kidnaps Lorenzo, sends the note, and drives away. The lead officer reached for his handcuffs, but Elias held up a hand. "Wait." Elias frowned. If she's this careful, why leave the logs? He hesitated, nearly calling for her arrest before a thought stopped him. He returned to the study. The ink stain had dried into an obsidian crust. He pulled the connection logs for the laptop. It hadn't been accessed physically, it had been bridged via a Trojan. The call was coming from within, but the caller wasn't the owner, Elias whispered. He examined the note's syntax. It contained alphanumeric strings, remnants of a high-frequency trading shorthand used in high-frequency trading. Pietro Moretti had built his fortune on those algorithms. Elias shifted his gaze to Pietro. The partner was suddenly very interested in the exit. As soon as their eyes met, Pietro bolted toward the west wing. Elias gave chase, but Pietro slammed his heavy door and threw the bolt. The perfect case against Isabella had dissolved, replaced by a new, more desperate suspect. "The play is changing," Elias muttered, his pulse quickening. By morning, the certainty shattered again. Isabella's alibi was ironclad, a recorded Zoom call with New York from 2 to 2:30 a.m. She couldn't have been in the vineyard and on that call, the lawyer confirmed. Isabella was cleared.
The ransom note was a digital ghost. Elias hammered on Pietro's door. When it opened, Pietro looked like a man who had been through a war. "I didn't do it. I was trying to stop him," Pietro cried. The room was filled with shredded documents. Balance sheets showing the Rossi Empire was a hollow shell. Pietro confessed Lorenzo had been embezzling for years. "I helped him move the first 5 million because he promised me a seat on the board. I didn't know he was planning to vanish." Pietro collapsed, finally realizing he'd been the architect of his own ruin. A search of Pietro's laptop revealed he hadn't sent the note. He'd merely been the one whose coding style Lorenzo had mimicked. Marco's car was inspected. The mileage matched the records. The car hadn't moved. Isabella was innocent. Marco was immobile, and Pietro was a pawn. The investigation hit a wall. Elias stood in the vineyard, staring at the villa's stones. "You're still here, aren't you?" He thought back to the study, to the missing fountain pen. A man doesn't take his pen to his own kidnapping. He takes it to a closing. Elias bypassed the family and went to the villa's mainframe for environmental data. 2:50 a.m. Lorenzo enters the study. 20 minutes of silence. 2:12 a.m. The HVAC system spikes. The ventilation is set to maximum purge, creating a roar that would drown out any sound. 2:15 a.m. The remote access note is sent. 2:18 a.m. The black car appears on camera. But the biometric door remained sealed until morning. He didn't leave through the door, Elias realized, and he didn't leave through the window. He pulled the architectural scans. The villa was built over an ancient Etruscan wine cellar. Elias returned to the study, tore up the rug, and tapped the tiles. Near the fireplace, the sound turned hollow. He reached into the soot and found a rusted iron lever. With a groan of stone, the floor retracted. A staircase descended into the darkness. Elias lit his light. The air smelled of old wine and fresh sweat. On the floor were the imprints of Lorenzo's bespoke loafers.
The tunnel emerged in a hidden alcove in the vineyard where the car had been seen. Caught on a stone was Lorenzo's soak pocket square. A masterpiece of timing, Lorenzo triggered the noise, sent the note, and walked out the bottom of his own house. It wasn't a kidnapping, it was an extraction from himself. But why the ink? Elias closed his eyes, visualizing the desk.
Elias stood over the desk, recreating the struggle. The ink stain. It had been poured with precision to obscure the L in the signature. "The pen," Elias said. "The Montegrappa NeroUno." Lorenzo never went anywhere without it. He hadn't lost it. He'd packed it. Then he saw it, the logical fracture. The bottle had been knocked to the left. Lorenzo Rossi was right-handed. In a genuine struggle, he would have knocked it right. To go left required a deliberate reach. Elias called Miller. Audit the NeroUno shell company. Now. The response came in minutes. 12 million euros had been moved in 48 hours. The destination, a private holding in Zurich, registered to a Mr. NeroUno. "The pen isn't just a prop," Elias smiled. "It's the alias." Lorenzo had bled his family dry. The audit was coming, and he knew he couldn't survive it. He staged the kidnapping so the family would fight over the ransom while he vanished with the fortune. He used Isabella's laptop to ensure the police would look for a killer, not a ghost. The car was a vintage electric roadster he had hidden months ago. At the tunnel's exit, Elias found a discarded slip, a flight manifest for Grosseto, destination Argentina. The flight was 2 hours. Lorenzo was waiting in a safe house. Elias looked at the map. He almost headed for the hangar, then caught himself. Lorenzo was too arrogant to wait in a terminal. He'd want to watch his work. Elias checked the estate maps for a high-ground vantage point.
A secluded hunting lodge on the estate's edge. Elias approached in silence. The black car was parked in the grass, charging from a generator. Inside, Lorenzo Rossi sat by a fire, the Monte Grappa in his hand as he reviewed his new passport. Elias stepped into the light. Lorenzo didn't flinch. He looked up with a cold smile. "You're late, detective." He held up the pen. "A beautiful instrument. It writes the future while the past is still drying." Elias sat opposite him. The ink bottle was a nice touch, but a right-handed man shouldn't try to be a lefty in a panic. Lorenzo laughed. "A small oversight. I wanted the drama of the L being cut short." "You framed your family. You left Isabella to face a cell." Lorenzo leaned forward, his eyes vacant. "Family is a name we share, not a debt I owe. They wanted my power. I gave them what they deserved, nothing. The 12 million won't last. I don't need a legacy, just a sunset without an audit." The physical reconstruction begins. 2 nights ago, Elias sits in the study, calm. He sets the HVAC to maximum. He pours the ink over the signature to mimic a struggle. He kicks over the chair, the sound muffled by the fans. He slides the lever and vanishes into the floor. He navigates the tunnel, his light cutting through the stone. He emerges, gets into the electric car, and drives with the lights off through the vines. At the lodge, he remotely triggers the note from Isabella's device using Pietro's coding style. He watches the sirens through binoculars, pouring a glass of his own vintage wine. The 12 million clears. The identity of NeroUno is live. The reconstruction ends. Lorenzo stood up. "A fascinating game, detective, but my flight is ready." He reached for his bag. Elias didn't move. "The airstrip was raided 10 minutes ago, Lorenzo. I didn't come to talk. I came to watch the lights go out."
Flashlights cut through the lodge windows as the carabinieri swarmed. Lorenzo stared at the door, his composure finally fracturing. The pen slipped from his fingers, hitting the stone. "I didn't leave a single trace," Lorenzo whispered. "You left a reason for me to keep looking," Elias said. As they led Lorenzo away, he looked back at the villa, the empire he had escaped to escape. Back at the house, the family was still arguing in the hall as the bank agents began tagging the furniture. Elias watched the sunrise over Valdorcia. The gold was back, but the house was empty. He sent the final transmission to Geneva. Subject in custody. Assets frozen. The NeroUno has run out of ink. In OVI headquarters, Director Miller looked at the confirmation. He sighed, a tired sound in the quiet office. On his desk was a map with a black dot over Tuscany. He picked up a cheap plastic ballpoint pen and marked it with an X.